because no matter what content you teach them today, when they graduate, I can't promise you that the content will still be...
It's most likely.
It may be obsolete.
Yeah.
This is a very noisy classroom, but it's a good type of noisy.
Higher education used to be a solid bet. Get a good diploma and you will land safely. That bargain is now breaking down. Across advanced economies, youth unemployment remains high. At the same time, generative AI is reshaping entry-level work, with the IMF estimating that about 60% of jobs are exposed to AI. And yet, in Singapore, 5 polytechnics continue to produce graduates with unusually strong employment outcomes. So, if employers have changed, what exactly has to change inside the classroom? Dr. Shirley Tan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
As you're aware, youth unemployment is right now a global challenge. So what makes Singapore's polytechnics maintain such a strong employment record in the recent years?
I think it starts with the mission from all the polytechnics in Singapore. And the mission is actually to prepare school leavers for the world that they are going to be living in. And it's not just the work, but it's life skills as well. A life skill set where we train them in thinking, processing, and also be able to solve problems as they go.
When people talk about employability, they usually jump to think about resume workshops, alumni sharings, they think of mock interviews. Some faculty would even argue that their classroom have nothing to do with employability. How would you respond to that sentiment?
I think the day we start teaching, at least in a polytechnic, is that we are thinking of how our students could be useful to a certain industry, because our subject matters, our diplomas are all very applied in nature. So very naturally, we think of the whole process.
How does that translate into a real-world classroom context?
Real-world classroom context, I'll say that we work a lot with the industry. They have an office space within our institution, and they also give us live brief. So our problems, our case scenarios are very realistic, very authentic. Yeah.
Paint us a picture of what a employment-ready classroom actually looks like day to day.
Well, Ted, let me ask you a question. Are you able to see my thoughts? You can't, right? So visualization of the thinking process is a very important aspect of learning.
Right.
One huge thing that I collected data on about student learning, it came from the student, is that they were able to visualize some of the very difficult things that they didn't understand. And that's through a lot of peer interaction as well as teacher-student interaction as well. So when you go into my classroom, you'll say that, hey, this is a very noisy classroom, but it's a good type of noisy. So it's the thinking process, isn't it? It's the way that you have to interact and also learn with the peers as well.
And communicate clearly
So
to them.
those are clearly very important skill set, of which I go back to what I said about life skills. Yeah.
That's correct. You mentioned case scenarios. So can you tie that to a specific pedagogy that you would employ in the classroom?
Yeah. A lot of this are actually project-based learning, and some of it are problem-based learning as well.
Can you give us an example of a wicked problem?
I'll define it as things that are not easily solved. Because if it's something that can be easily solved, you don't need to use problem-based learning, right? You can just look at it and then solve the problem. But in wicked problem, usually there's not just one way to solve the problem. And it's, I think in our world context, sustainability has got a lot of wicked problem. If you solve one problem, another 2 issue might arise. It kind of make you think, how do I solve the problem in order to not create another 2 other problems? So, or how do I minimize the risks involved?
I see. Right. So moving on to project-based.
Project-based learning is a bit more straight-laced. I'll say that content knowledge is usually being taught up front. You still go for your you do e-lectures these days. With e-lectures and then with your tutorial session, you'll be able to do your project. So that's the usual context of a project-based learning.
Some teachers worry that a more participatory approach inside the classroom would receive blowback from the students because they're more accustomed to lecture style. How would you respond to that concern?
Scaffolding is a huge part. We all think that we will be sitting down here where our teacher up there kind of downloading all the knowledge to us, right?
That's correct.
So we all went through that. In fact, that's an easier mode for students, just to listen and then just to nod as the teacher says.
Agreed.
Right? But I think that needs to be changed as well. And so when students come into a classroom like this, it takes a lot out of them. So they have to be ready for that. And some may not like it. They prefer that, hey, why don't you just tell me, rather than me having to solve this through a problem. Yeah, I think anything good may not always be pleasant. Like when you're young,
love that.
your dad may tell you, hey, you need to exercise and get you up in the morning at 5 o'clock for a run. You may not like that, but is it good for you? Definitely, right? So I'll say in a similar train of thought that it is something that is necessary, but you may not like it at that very moment. But over time, you know that this is a skill set that is building you up. Students who've gone through COVID, they're very different. And students who are being very exposed to social media, they're also very different. Are we going to teach this generation of students the same way we were taught? We can sit down for a lecture, 3 hours, no issue. But can our students do the same? So this is the question that every teacher has to ask themselves. So whenever you implement anything, there is usually a dip before it gets better.
There are a good number of Chinese faculty would say, I agree with what you're saying, that there is pedagogical change needed in my classroom. However, my physical space is not up to standard, and my technological equipment is very basic. So when this situation is not ideal, when the spatial design is not quite there, what would be your advice to them to start moving the needle?
So some classrooms are still very fixed furnitures and all that. But when I'm assigned one of those classrooms, I still have the liberty to move those tables around. So I still go in and manually move the tables and chairs to an ideal situation, because really if we do it in a classroom setting, it set us very far apart from the student. I'm right in the front and they're all at the back. I think spatial design is also very important in teaching these days. Like it or not, we are no longer the sage on the stage. Content is so easy to get from everywhere these days. So in order for you to do that, to make the change, I think start small. Start from the moving of furniture first. But there are ways of working, whether your numbers is more than 20, 40, or like Eric Mazo's class is more than 100. So I think the constraints are usually ourselves. Hence, I said it's the mindset. Yeah, the first to change must be the mindset.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
This is yours.
Thank you so much.